When most people think of an RS Escort, they probably think of a Mark II going sideways through the Kielder Forest. But for people of a certain age, i.e. me, this is top dog, the RS1600i. I always wanted one of these, but the closest I ever got was a remote control version with the controller missing. So now I finally got a chance to meet one of my heroes and take it for a drive, and I'm really looking forward to it. So here we are in an RS1600i. Mark III Escort. Now, of course, it wasn't the first hotted up Mark III. That honour goes to the XR3 of 1980, which you may remember for its cloverleaf wheels, neat little body kit, and it had a twin choke Weber on its 1.6 CVH engine to make 96 horsepower. Not bad, but when you had rivals like the Golf GTI kicking around, a little bit lacking. So if you wanted a Mark III Escort to really take on a GTI, you had to wait a little bit. And oddly, Ford employed two ways of getting there. While Ford's specialist vehicle engineering department in Dunton were busy creating the XR3i, over in Germany, Ford Motorsport had another little plan up its sleeve, creating a homologation special for motorsport purposes, of which they needed to build 5,000. The RS1600i. They took the 1.6 CVH engine from the XR3, added Bosch K-Jetronic analog fuel injection, and gave the engine a few tweaks. It had a big valve head, higher compression ratio, a unique high lift cam, solid lifters, a 4-branch manifold, and a strange distributorless electronic ignition system with 2 coils made by a company called AFD, which had an electronic rev limiter that kicked in at 6,500 revs. So pretty advanced for 1981, 1982. By then, the XR3 had a 5-speed gearbox, and so did the RS1600, but it had a different, shorter top gear and a different final drive, making it unique to the model. You also got a neat finned aluminium rocker cover with Ford Motorsport written on the top. And all in, the engine produced a healthy 115 horsepower, which was well up on the 96 brake horsepower of the XR3. Now that made it good for 116 mile an hour, not bad for the time, and 0 to 60 in 8.7 seconds. So on top of the engine tweaks, the RS1600i had a unique suspension setup as well. Up front you had an aluminium cross member with 2 compression struts so you could adjust the camber, and it had unique Coney dampers as well, with these spring platforms sitting an inch lower. Probably the big letdown was the brakes. It had the fairly small ventilated discs and small rear drums of the XR3, but because the car was built for Germany and it was left-hand drive, right-hand drive cars had to have a crossbar going across to the left-hand servo. That got a bit floppy. Didn't really work too well. Although I have to say, on this car, they're perfectly fine, and I'm not pushing it anyway. The RS1600i made its debut at Frankfurt in 1981, but we Brits didn't get to see it until October 1982, when it made its debut at the British Motor Show. Of course, it was offered alongside the XR3i that SVE had come up with. Now, legend has it that the boys at SVE were offered an RS1600i to basically copy, but it was a case of not invented here, and they went their own way and left the RS1600i sat in a corner. It's fair to say that the two cars were engineered quite differently, and for some, the XR3i was the better car despite having less power. It certainly had better brakes because the servo was on the right hand side, and it had big rear drums from the Escort van. What can't be denied is the RS1600i is cooler than the XR3i, and arguably cooler than the RS Turbo that followed. Now, that's because of its rarity for starters, but also it just looked cooler. On the outside, you got a deeper front air dam, a biplane rear spoiler, cool strobe graphics, stripes down the side, unique 15-inch 7-spoke alloys, which are quite big for the time. And inside as well, it's just really nice. It's really nicely appointed. You've got these amazing Shield seats, which are just some of the best seats fitted to any car, let alone one from the 80s or an Escort specifically. And the cool RS 4-spoke steering wheel that I just love. Just gives that a nice motorsport feel inside. And of course, there is that rarity element. They only planned to make 5,000 of these, but ended up making 8,659. And 2,600 of those came to the UK. Now, to put that into context, 25,000 XR3Is were sold in Britain in 1983 alone. So it's definitely a case of cult classic, not bestseller. The most popular colour was black, followed by sunburst red and diamond white, but this is Caspian blue, a really rare colour. Only 290 cars made in this shade. So what did people think at the time? Well, as I've said, some road testers prefer the XR3i, but they said that the RS1600i's cam made it a little bit less usable in town, and that the unique suspension setup made it a little bit twitchy. Although they did improve that on later cars. From May 1983, they moved the suspension mounting points, which made it a little bit easier to control. But obviously, at this kind of speed in a car that's worth probably 30 grand plus, I'm not going to push it and find out too much. What I can tell you is it goes surprisingly well. I'm certainly enjoying driving it about. But of course, it was all rather short-lived. Only 8,659 of these cars were made, and production ended in July 1983. Once they'd got that homologation out the way and a few extra, it was done. And we didn't get an RS Escort again until the RS Turbo. Now, because of this model's rarity, they've never been cheap. I mean, you may have been able to buy one in the mid-90s for a couple of grand maybe, but not anymore. Those days are long gone. We've seen these cars sell for more than £40,000, and only a couple of weeks ago, a nice white example went through one of the auctions and smashed through its estimate to sell for £27,000. So they're considerably sought after among Ford enthusiasts. And when you consider £40,000 for a CVH powered Escort, is it worth it? I mean, you could buy 2 Lotus Elises for that money and have change. So why do people spend it? Well, maybe nostalgia has a lot to answer for. But for people like me who grew up with around these cars, wanting these cars, I suppose the money doesn't matter. It's just a case of getting the car on the driveway that you wanted back then. And Ford was so good at that. Ford was so good at making you want cars that perhaps dynamically weren't the best. I mean, the Golf GTI was probably still the class leader. In fact, it was the class leader. But with its deep spoilers, cool alloys, strobe graphics, cool seats, 4-spoke steering wheel, Ford were able to sprinkle some magic on the Mark III Escort, create the RS1600i, and make you want it. And I want one now. I still want one now. They say don't meet your heroes, and maybe it's a flawed hero, but this one's up for sale, and if only I had a few more zeros on my bank balance, I'd be heading the queue. Good Lord. I hope that was okay. That was the struggle.